Erev Tov, everyone. One of the more well-known customs in regards to Jewish conversion is that when a non-Jewish person goes to a rabbi and says, "I'd like to be a Jew," the rabbi is supposed to send them away 3 times. 3 times they have to ask and say, "Convert me." Send them away 3 times. Now, that is actually something on the books, and I think we'll see the original source. If not that inside, we'll see where it came from. But when you look at a source or hear a practice like that, you think, well, Jews obviously have never gone knocking on someone's door and said, "Have you ever heard of the truth of the gefilte fish? Would you like to know what your bubby really wants from you?" Jews don't do that. Jews don't missionize. And the reality is that for the most part, that's true. Judaism, for different reasons, has been hesitant to accept converts. Sometimes it's from a positive, loving place, like it's very challenging to be a Jew and understand what you're getting in for. It's a great life commitment. We'd be happy to have you if you're sure. Sometimes it's more, I don't want to say negative, but what are you really trying to get out of this? We're trying to be more possessive and protective. And one of the things we're not going to discuss in this class is there's a mitzvah in the Torah to treat the convert well. And one of the challenges, or the rabbis are very explicit, is a convert should never be reminded where they came from. And there's some communities of Jews that don't fully accept converts. So the very fact that that idea exists, that people would treat a convert differently, like they don't really belong, again, it seems antithetical to the idea of knocking on people's doors like Jehovah's Witness, or the Christian, mostly Christianity, but other religions as well, but particularly Christianity, who for hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of years, have been very actively trying to get converts. Now, why? Why has Judaism not been doing that? And one of the interesting articles that I read in preparation for this class flipped the question and said explicitly, don't ask why Jews don't convert, ask why these other religions actively do seek conversion. And for Christianity, part of the answer is that for them to bring heaven on earth, for them to bring the Garden of Eden, the world to come that Jews also believe in, everyone needs to be Christian. But that's not our focus today. Our focus is, what's the story of the history of Jews? And were Jews ever missionaries? And the simple answer is, for the most part, like I said, no, with one well-known exception. And we'll read that. One well-known exception where Jews basically forcefully converted an entire country. And then there's a few other early sources. The problem is these sources were written either by our competition or by our enemies. So it's really hard to tell exactly what the truth is about Jews actively trying to convert people to Judaism at a particular time in history. So that'll be the first part of the class, is different examples that we have to take with a grain of salt. One example that everyone accepts is it's beyond missionary. It's really, again, a massive forced conversion. And then the second half of the class, we'll be looking at some of the sources and trying to understand, at least today, why Jews generally are not in favor of missionizing and forced conversion. And again, there's both a positive, there's something unique about being Jewish, and it's not that we reject converts, but it's not something that everybody needs to do or should do. And then the more negative, which is, if you're not part of the family, if you're not part of the tribe already, then we're wary about you coming in. So those are the different parts of the class. So before I jump into it, any questions up until now? You can just throw up your hand, and tomorrow I'll just be unmuting you for the first source. Excellent. So these first two sources here are really interesting because they're written sometime in the 3rd to 5th century. So this is, or at least compiled together, the Midrash put together. So this is after the fall of the Second Temple, where it's, really like the Romans, it's, the later days of the Romans in a lot of ways. So this is not the birth of Christianity. Christianity is pretty well established at this point as a major religion, but they're talking about Avraham. Because if someone said, oh, did Jews missionize? What a lot of people might say is obviously Abraham. Abraham wandered around converting people. But the reason I mention when this source is written is because it sort of reflects a little bit the worldview of the time when it was written. And even though this was put together in the 3rd to 5th century, it might be based off of something earlier, probably in the 0th or the 1st century, when Jews and Christians were still competing for the hearts and souls. Obviously, Christianity won out and Rome went full on Christian. But again, the rabbis writing this are living in a world where there's a chance that Judaism could be the next monotheistic religion to really take off. So Tamar, if you would take this first source from Bereshit Rabbah, and again, this is a midrash about what Avraham was doing when God sent him out, but it's through the lens of the value of conversion at this time in history. We'll come back to that, what these rabbis might have thought about conversion. Please, Tamar.
Rabbi Brechia said, to what was Abraham, our father, similar? To a flask of balsam tree juice closed with a tight lid, placed in the corner, and its fragrance was not emitted. When it was moved, its fragrance was emitted. Thus the Holy Blessed One said to Abraham, our father, move yourself from place to place, and your name will become great in the world.
Excellent. Tomorrow I'll have you read the next one in a moment because it's really the continuation of this piece. But the idea is that Avraham had all this great potential literally bottled up inside of him. But as soon as Hashem said, Lech Lecha, go forth, and he started spreading the word of the one God, people were so enamored. They literally could smell the beauty, or not literally, figuratively, they could smell the beauty of his words, and it enticed them and inspired them to want to follow him. And in the beginning, that's really, Avraham was a kind of missionary, went around spreading the word of God, building up a tribe, a group. Now, for the rest of the Torah, except for the one explicit example we'll look at, there's really nothing else like this. There are some people who might have converted in the times of the kings because they wanted to be part of the winning team, as it were. But really, the idea of missionizing really doesn't show up in the Torah. We have examples of conversions, obviously Ruth being one of the most famous, but the idea of someone wandering around spreading the word of our tradition is foreign. It was really just Avraham, because once Avraham built up a big group, then he turned it into a family, and then into tribes, and then ultimately a nation. But the idea is they're all descended from Avraham. The idea of outside people choosing to come in who weren't already part of that group at the beginning was peculiar, which is why it's very important to see, how the rabbis see Avraham as bringing in outsiders. So Tamar, go ahead and take the second one, which is just a little bit later in this midrash.
Whoever brings an idol worshiper to Judaism and converts him, it is as if he created him. Rav Huna said, Abraham converted the men and Sarah converted the women.
Now, this is very important. Again, if we're thinking about Abraham and the idea of one God he was bringing to the world, this midrash makes perfect sense. And they're doing a little bit of men and women are separate, mechitza, everything like that. But the idea of fighting idolatry is a very biblical, very Torah-based idea. But when they're talking about anyone who brings in an idol worshiper, yes, that's consistent with the Torah. But when they're writing this, again, around the 3rd century or a little earlier, we're not familiar with that being a popular idea. We're like, oh, I didn't think Jews were converting people at that time. I thought after Abraham, it was just you're either in the group or a few people choose to join. But this midrash, again, even though they're talking about something that happened thousands of years ago, they use the midrash as a vehicle for their philosophy at the time. So maybe the rabbis in the 0 to 3rd century were interested in converting people. So when we talk about, there's no clear sources other than the very next one about conversion in our history. This midrash is one of those ones that hints at maybe there was a time when Jews were more missionizing and actively seeking out non-Jews than we thought. So Elizabeth, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. Oh, Tamar, do you have a question?
What about after Yetziat Mitzrayim at Mount Sinai? There was a mass conversion of the Asafsuf Rav.
So you're talking about the people that joined together, and that was not that was their choice. They came along. There's a famous example of this nation, the Khazars, who in Europe, who the king decided to convert the whole nation. But again, he was actively, at least the story that we have, which has a lot of truth to it, he was actively seeking a religion for his people, and he chose Judaism. So maybe he kind of forced them, but those are all examples of people choosing to join Judaism. We're talking about actively going out there and saying, like at a school fair, like Judaism's the religion you want. But really good question. So that you can find plenty of examples. So this next source is any article you read is pretty much going to say this is the only time, other than maybe Avraham, this is the only real, and again, it's not just missionizing, this is forced conversion, but it's really just this. And the person we're talking about called Hyrcanus, whose name, he's never called that in the book of Maccabees. He's a Maccabee. He's of the Hashmonaim, the Hasmonean family, and of the priest. And again, one of the issues with the Maccabees is they fought to get the temple back. Beautiful, great. And they were priests serving the temple. Beautiful, great. But then they took over as the kings. Not good. That's for the tribe of Judah. So there was a lot of corruption and power grabbing, etc. So Hyrcanus, who was also known as Yochanan, his first name, or Jonathan, the Kohen Gadol, was both a religious figure and a very much political figure. And he was constantly trying to protect his nation. But there was one moment when the Seleucid Empire, which was nearby, was in a state of weakness because, as Josephus in his History of the Jews will note, their leader Antiochus in the 2nd century BC died. And again, Josephus was, when the Romans destroyed the Second Temple, Josephus defected to the Romans, but then he was able to survive, but then he ended up writing a number of histories. And most of his histories were really to try and convince the Romans the Jews ain't that bad. So even though he betrayed us, I don't know if that's the right word, his writings are some of the most important in human history, but particularly Jewish history. So Elizabeth, please, from his Antiquities of the Jews.
But when
Hyrcanus, or Hyrcanus.
Thank you. Heard of the death of Antiochus, he presently made an expedition against the cities of Syria, hoping to find them destitute of fighting men, and of such were able to defend them. Hyrcanus took also Dora and Marissa, cities of
Idumea,
and subdued all the Idumeans, and permitted them to stay in the country if they would circumcise their genitals and make use of the laws of Jews. And they were so desirous of living in the country of their forefathers that they submitted to the use of circumcision and the rest of the Jewish ways of living, at which time, therefore, this befell them, that they were hereafter no other than Jews.
Excellent. So again, in a moment of weakness for the enemy tribes nearby, went to this country, the Idumeans. And by the way, the temple that we have ruins of today in Jerusalem are the ruins of Herod's temple. Herod is a descendant of the Idumeans. So he's a Jew, but of that mass forced conversion. And by the way, if you're thinking, wait a minute, forced mass circumcision, I've heard of that before with the rape of Dinah, of Yaakov's daughter in the Torah, and the two brothers who forced them all to get conversion or get circumcisions. That's not usually thought of as a mass conversion, but I suppose you could look at it that way. But Hyrcanus was strong at this time, and he forced the Idumeans to convert to Judaism, and they did. And their descendants were basically Jews. But here it was not a religious thing, it was a political power grab. And that's a very important thing for us to dwell on for a moment. For Judaism, the importance of our religion and our connection has nothing to do with country or nation or military power or political power. It's purely about serving God. And God can be served by anybody, anywhere. It doesn't matter whether 5 people serve God or 5 million people serve God. All that matters is the people that God has a covenant with, that they serve God. If you want to join that party, go for it. However, if you're trying to take over the world politically or militarily, it definitely helps to convince everybody of your ideology and your religion. So if you are a new religion on the scene and you want everybody to think and believe in the same thing, when you go to war, you can say we're doing it for our collective God and it's for political reasons, then forced conversions and missionizing and proselytizing make a lot more sense. And that idea, as which is given an example here by what Hyrcanus did, you can see throughout history of other religions. Now, again, Judaism became something very different, which we'll see in section 2. But again, if Judaism was trying to become a mighty military and political power, we probably would have kept missionizing and trying to proselytize people. So any questions up until now? Excellent. So other than the first sources, which were again written later, the Midrash about Abraham, who he was a missionizer, but again, he was like the first for the Jewish religions, the Judeo-Christian religions. And other than this clear example, which isn't missionizing, it's really a forced mass conversion, we don't really have any clear examples of Jews doing missionary work. However, when the Jews were living among the Romans, there were a number of texts that popped up that either explicitly or implicitly implied that the Jews were trying to convert people. But as you'll see, a lot of these sources were either hearsay, secondary from our enemies or from our competition. So this first one from an old 1994 article in the magazine Shema, this author Chaim Perlmutter wrote an article on Judaism's missionary tradition. And he argued that, certainly not today, there's nothing like that today, but he argued that there actually was one for a significant period of time. So Brian, I am unmuting you. And if you would take source number 4, now he's actually going to mention some rabbinic sources that were implying that there was missionaries, but these sources are few and far between, but they kind of back up the next two sources we'll read. So go ahead, Brian, source number 4.
As the Jewish center of learning and population shifted to Babylonia, the evidence of intense proselytization continues. The Geonim actually set quotas. We note that rabbis Judah and Joseph and Rav Ashi chided the people for not bringing in sufficient converts.
Excellent, thank you. So he's mentioning rabbis from the Talmud who are 3rd to 5th century, and we saw in our first source, the Midrash, the rabbis certainly prized the idea of bringing in idolaters. So there might have been something going on. And again, we don't have so much evidence to know what was really going on, but the rabbis, when we were under the Romans and they were shopping around for a new religion, it is entirely possible that the rabbis were in a battle to convert people. And something interesting, I've been, mentioning that Christianity is obviously like the big, missionizing religion here. But remember, Christianity started as a sect of Judaism. So it might have been that Jews in general were trying to bring in non-Jews. And in fact, when we look at these next sources, maybe they weren't even talking about the Jews that we know, that we are descendants of. Maybe they meant the Christians, and these authors and sources don't even make a distinction between different kinds of Jews, though the last one probably does, as you'll see. But again, it might have been that under the Romans, that it was clear that a new religion was getting, if Christianity is gaining popularity, maybe Judaism is gaining popularity. There might have been a moment in history when the rabbis said, maybe we can win this. Maybe we can convince this entire nation to adopt our religion. And you see that reflected. Brian, I'll let you take this next short source as well. And this is, I don't remember a lot about this writer, Cassius Dio, but he wrote, a 4-volume history of Rome in the year 19. So please.
As there had been a large influx of Jews into Rome, and they were converting many of the native inhabitants of their principles, he expelled the great majority of them.
So you're talking about the leader of Rome at the time, but again, he's the leader then is seeing this is not a good thing. But again, the experience on the ground of the Romans is that the Jews are coming in, of course, because you conquered our country and are trying to integrate us into yours. But we are very strong at our religion, and if you're going to force us to be part of your society, we're going to bring our identity with us, which is Judaism. So it's entirely possible that we were indeed trying to convert people. Some pushed against it, some might have accepted it. Obviously, we were not successful the way that Christianity was. And what's interesting is, I'll have you take one more, Brian, because it's literally the shortest line ever. Another contemporary source here, or it's not contemporary, it's a little bit later, but it's still in the 1st century, is from the Gospels, specifically the book of Matthew. Now, he's writing from the perspective of a breakaway from Judaism. So when he talks about the Jews or the Pharisees, he sees them as the other in Judaism, the sect that, you're not going to win. So Brian, go ahead from source number 5.
Teachers of the law and Pharisees, you travel over land and sea to win a single convert.
Now, again, is that true, or is this a polemic line? Were the Jews really actively going out there and missionizing and trying to get their religion to be the one accepted by the Romans? There is a preponderance, or maybe not preponderance, but there's a good amount of evidence here that under the Romans, we thought we might be able to gain political favor, convert the nation, it's happened before, and become ascendant. And again, the fact that Christianity did become so popular, it wasn't out of the realm of possibility. Now, part of Christianity, and this is not the point of the class, part of Christianity becoming so popular is because they got rid of so many of the laws, and they really made it to a different religion altogether. Instead of making it Judaism with a belief in this new messianic figure, it became essentially a version of a pagan religion that brought in a number of Jewish traditions and histories, et cetera, like that. Much more complicated than what I just said, but Christianity was no longer Judaism. So that was one of the reasons they were able to be so successful, because they didn't require circumcision or kashrut or any of the things other than pure faith, and then you'll get all the good stuff. The Jews were saying, convert to us, you just got to do all the other stuff too. So of course, who would want to do that? And that kind of leads to the second part of the class. But again, the answer, have we ever been missionaries? The answer is very likely. There's a lot of evidence to suggest it. Some of it was written by our enemies who hated that we were doing it. Some was written by our competition who hated us for doing it. And some was hinted at by the rabbis in the Talmud about us valuing conversion. So what's implied is, yeah, we probably did for a while. Why did we stop? That might have been because we were so beaten down. And if we had done it, the reality is we probably would have been killed for doing it. We had so little political power in any way, shape, or form once Roman became a Christian empire, that Jews trying to convert would have been, beheaded or whatever the punishment would be. So that might be a practical reason why it stopped. But what developed in this next section is more of a philosophy about why we don't actively seek out converts. Not that we reject them, but there's something unique about being a Jew, and not everybody is meant to be a Jew. The people who are meant to be it, we welcome you if you're willing to do the work. But we are not a missionizing religion. We don't need everybody. We just need the few and the faithful. So Gloria, this first source here is the famous one I mentioned earlier, from a big section in the book of Yevamot, which actually deals more with like divorce things and stuff like that. But it is the most important and famous section on the laws of conversion. And someone asked me the other day, they may or may not be on this call, after reading through the laws of conversion, including in this section, it seems like practically what happens in Orthodoxy today has gone off the rails in terms of what's expected. And my answer, I'm sorry I didn't get back to that person, is, oh, you betcha. You're like, you ain't just whistling Dixie. The difference between what the rabbis expected here, which was challenging but reasonable, and what's asked of people who want to convert to Orthodoxy today, worlds apart. And there's a lot of reasons for it. But Gloria, if you would take this first source, please.
The sages taught in a Baraita with regard to a potential convert who comes to a court in order to convert. At the present time, when the Jews are in exile, the judges of the court say to him, "What did you see that motivated you to come to convert? Don't you know that the Jewish people at the present time are anguished, suppressed, despised, and harassed, and hardships are frequently visited upon them?" If he says, "I know, and although I am unworthy of joining the Jewish people and sharing in their sorrow, I nevertheless desire to do so," then the court accepts him immediately to begin the conversion process.
Yeah, they say, Omer Yodeani, I know how hard it is, Ve'eni Kadai, and I'm not even worthy of being a Jew and accepting this great responsibility. So you see a number of important things in here. And by the way, when it says at this time, this is written about 1,500 years ago, or compiled about 1,500 years ago, but a lot of this is still true. Who wants to be a Jew now with the anti-Semitism, the hatred, what's going on with Israel? Why would anybody want to, proudly wear that badge? So if somebody still says, despite that, I want to serve God in this special and unique way and be part of this tribe, and says, and I don't deserve it, I'm not special. If someone says, you want me as a Jew, I'm going to make the Jews a better people, we say, bye-bye, 2, 3, 4, an infinite number of times. But if someone says, I feel like I want to be closer to God, I feel like this is my path, and there are rabbis today, we're not going into all the texts about conversion, but there are traditions that somebody who sincerely wants to convert to Judaism is a Jew, but when they were reincarnated, which we also believe in, they ended up in the wrong body, and they're just trying to find their way home. And in a lot of ways, that's quite a beautiful sentiment. It's very powerful, but it also gives the idea that nobody in their right mind would ever actually choose to be Jewish. Those who are born Jewish, okay, you got to deal with it. But for somebody to want to be Jewish, there has to be, it's not that they're crazy, but there has to be this special spark in their soul driving them towards it. And the whole point is not everyone is meant to be Jewish. And what's interesting is we heard about some earlier sources, these rabbis that said, oh, you should convert every single person. It's wonderful. It's beautiful. But Leonard, later in this section, when they've already given such a hard time to the converts, there's this deeply disturbing statement that many have tried to struggle with, but it reflects a general hesitancy and rejection of just converts in general, which we see by some Jews today. So go ahead, Leonard, please. Source number 2.
Rabbi Helbo said, converts are as harmful to the Jewish people as a leprous scab on the skin, as it is written, and the convert shall join himself with them, and they shall cleave.
Venispechu, which is, they connect it to the word sapachat, scab, something that sticks to you.
Yeah. And they shall cleave to the house of Jacob, Isaiah 14, number 1. This alludes to the fact that the cleaving of the convert to the Jewish people is like a scab.
Thank you. Now, this could be a lone opinion by Rabbi Chelbo, who just doesn't like converts and thinks that they're, inauthentic. And there are Talmudic sources that imply that, at certain times in history, if someone converts because they think they can get rich, or, let's say in the times of King David and King Solomon, when the Jews are a mighty nation, if you convert, we're like, we don't think you really want to convert to serve God. You want to do it because you want to be on the winning team. We need to make sure that these converts are completely and totally sincere. But if they come in with any level of insincerity, then they just, it's a pox on us. Now, there has been a more positive interpretation, which is less likely, but it's a beautiful one, which is that converts, now this is true, many converts when they come in, particularly because they feel they need to prove themselves, and unfortunately, there are some rabbis out there who make the converts feel like they need to prove themselves, which is not a positive, healthy thing to do. But the converts they just go so intense into their Judaism and their learning and their, everything like that, that they make the rest of us who are born Jewish look bad. So it's not that it's a scab and that the converts are bad, it's that it's bad that they make us look bad. So whatever interpretation it is, the point here is that we're seeing very clear development around 1500 years ago that we really just want to discourage converts. And again, is it merely because we're at politically we want to discourage converts because if somebody does want to convert and they think that we encourage them, we'll get killed, or because we genuinely feel like converts are, just not good, not necessary. We don't know 100% sure what happened historically to shift from under the Romans, us actively seeking converts, to here, making it not near impossible, but really, really discouraging them. And we see elsewhere in the Talmud, in this next source, tomorrow I'll unmute you, is the rabbis don't just talk about it as discouraging, they also try and bring in these different sources that are implying like you don't need to convert to be a good person. And by the way, that is something that we hold and believe today, but it's part of the package of ultimately discouraging conversion. Why would you convert? You can stay a non-Jew, just be a good non-Jew. So please, Tamar, from Sanhedrin 105.
And that wicked person, Balaam, also provided a sign with regard to himself. He said, let me die the death of the righteous, and let my end be like his. Numbers 23:10. If I die the death of the righteous by natural causes, my end will be like his, i.e., I will receive a share in the world to come, like the Jewish people. And if I do not die by natural causes, I will go to my people, Numbers 24:14, i.e., my fate will be that of the rest of the wicked people in my generation, who have no share in the world to come.
Thank you. At the end of the day, almost all religions, it comes down to, do I get into heaven or not? And if someone thinks Judaism is the only path to heaven, the answer the rabbis give explicitly is absolutely it is not, which is unlike certain other religions, which have actually started to change their tune on that and say maybe there is more than one path to God. Now, again, there's this clear distinction. For Jews, the only path to God is through Judaism, but for non-Jews, as long as they're a good person. In fact, Rambam here, Elizabeth, I'll unmute you, in his compilation of laws, probably connected to this source in the Talmud, explicitly writes on this. So go ahead, Elizabeth, source number 4.
Anyone who accepts upon himself the fulfillment of these 7 mitzvot and is precise in their observance is considered one of the pious among the Gentiles and will merit a share in the world to come.
Thank you. And these 7 laws he's mentioned are known as the Noahide laws, which are not written in the Torah, around the parsha, around the section on Noach, but there is actually a lot of evidence in the Torah that when Noach, in his ark and everything like that, after he came off, God does indeed give him some new rules. And the rabbis then developed that idea and imagining that God basically gave like a preview of the Torah, like an early version of religion to Noah and said, follow just these 7 basic things. Now, even with those, that's it, 7. Like remember in the Garden of Eden, they had 1 law. We saw how that turned out. Then under Noah, he gave 7. He said maybe more will help them. And we know how that turned out. I mean, depending on how you look at it. So then he came to his Jews, his Israelites, and said, great, the issue here is I haven't given them enough. So he gave us 613. We all know how that turned out. But the point here is really that any human being who wishes to connect to serve God, and the rabbis talk about this in the Torah, non-Jews can bring certain offerings, certain sacrifices. Judaism is not required, and that's so important. That is essential to the philosophy and theology of Judaism. Judaism was not given as a religion for the whole world to adopt. It was given to a people. So what we started with, Abraham kind of went out there and sort of missionized, it very quickly became something totally different. It became the religion of one tribe and their way to serve God. But as many other rabbis will argue, including Orthodox ones, God revealed God's self to every religion, at least a religion that believes in peace, every religion in the unique way that they needed to. So, this religion in this country is what they need, this religion in this country, what they need, and the Jews, this is their religion. So it wouldn't make any more sense for somebody living in West Hills, California, where I'm from, to learn ancient Greek than it would for somebody who's living in France to learn, learn how they talk in West Hills, California. The point is, you speak the language of the land where you live. I'm not, obviously it's valuable to learn multiple languages. My point is, if you live in France, you should speak French. If you live in West Hills, you should speak English. And there's nothing wrong with that. And it doesn't devalue any other people. It doesn't devalue any other religion. That's just where you live. And that makes sense for where you are and who you are and the nation you're a part of. And if somebody wants to move there for compelling reasons, okay, they can join. But don't move there for no reason whatsoever. So that's really where Judaism is not meant to be universal and everybody joins it. Judaism is meant to serve God and to be an example of how to live a good life. That's the extent of it. So these last 2 sources here are really interesting. And they really kind of, this source number here, 5, which is from just an online journal, but a really nice piece, as David Berger, just kind of elaborates on that idea. What's unique about Judaism and why it's not a missionizing religion. So Gloria, if you would take source number 5, please.
To become a Jew is to join a people, not just a faith. The concept of Jewishness the concept of Jewish chosenness, of the special sanctity of Israel as a collective, rendered the objective of a mass conversion to a Judaism problematic. Even in the eschaton, is that?
This is the end of times, in the end of times, like eschatology study of, the end of days, apocalypse and everything like that.
All the nations may call upon God together in a clear voice, but they remain discrete nations.
Exactly. So France can call God, the Roman Empire can call, the Catholics can call God, but they still remain those religions and those peoples. They don't all become Jews. Even in the end of times, when everything we taught in the Torah becomes true, you can still stay who you are and keep your identity. Only the Jews are supposed to be Jews. Please continue.
In Jewish eyes, those nations would presumably follow the Noahide code, binding in historical times as well as at the end of days, which defines God's expectations of non-Jews in a manner that keeps them separate from Israel.
Thank you. I wouldn't call it missionizing. There are some Jews I'm out there familiar who do kind of push this idea of keeping the laws of Noah to other people and you can become a Ben Noach, but there's no conversion process there. And the law, so one of the laws of the Noachide laws is to believe in God. So there's a religious thing, but the rest of them are not to kill, not to steal, to set up a court system, to not eat the flesh off of the animal, inappropriate things like that. To not do inappropriate things like that. But for the most part, Jews, and there's a plus and a minus to this. Jews kind of keep to themselves. So it means we're not pressuring other people to join us. Now, we do have a responsibility, and the Torah makes this clear. We're supposed to inspire other nations and spread, the oneness of God. We don't force it down people's throats. And the famous mitzvah in the Torah of destroying idolatry, that doesn't apply in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. If I'm driving down the street and I see a statue of Zeus, I don't ram my car into it. I just drive on by. However, if it's in the land of Israel itself, then that obligation, at least in the times when the temple is standing, does stand. So again, it's not about destroying idolatry worldwide. It's God chose a people in a specific land for a specific job, but not to the exclusion of other people. In no way are other peoples and other religions not valuable. And that's a very clear and important takeaway from Judaism. One of the things about discouraging conversion is we don't think what you have is necessarily bad. If it's evil and idolatry and it goes against the Noachide laws, then we will speak up because it's unethical and it's bad. But if you just have a different religion, good for you. Don't take on the 613 mitzvot and the hundreds of rabbinic ones. You don't need to. What you have is valuable. Serve God in your own way. And that's a very beautiful thing. And again, it runs counter to other religions, at least historically. But there are indeed many Christians today who still actively go on missions to convert people in other nations. And that is a very fundamentally different understanding of their religion and the way that we understand Judaism. And in fact, that leads to the last source that I'll take here. And I found this really cool article. So the few years ago, this is from 2018, the Diaspora Affairs Ministry put out a report. And again, this article and the rabbis who responded to it probably missed some of the nuances, but essentially to fight anti-Semitism and to fight anti-Zionism, the idea was to go out to people in the world, all over the world, who might be amenable to Judaism and perhaps encourage them to convert, which it was more a political thing. And that's the key thing. It was more a political move than it was a religious one. But many rabbis in Israel outrightly rejected it. So the article, at least the section I brought, religious Zionist rabbis have come out against the Diaspora Affairs Ministry report recommending Israel to reach out tens of millions of non-Jews with an affinity to Judaism. The rabbis criticized the report, saying that calling for the conversion of non-Jews is not Judaism's way. According to Jewish law, Judaism has no interest in influencing someone to convert. Now, we've seen that statement is very loaded, and we've seen that is developed, and it might have been different in the Roman times, but certainly today, that is a valid statement. When he says, according to Jewish law, he's probably referring to the Talmud, where we actively discourage people. There's no such thing, Rabbi Dov Lior told Haaretz. So if he came to this class or read those sources, it'd be interesting. He'd say, fine, we don't do it anymore. And when we did it, it's not clear that we did it, and we only did it for a short time. If someone comes to convert, then it's a good deed to bring them closer. And that is important. It is a positive thing. When someone wants to convert, don't mistreat them or push them away. If they sincerely want to come in, great, come over for chicken soup. But to go out and be a missionary, to influence someone, it's not the way of Judaism, Lior said. And in general, I would fully agree with that statement. I think overall, that is a valid statement. And I think we've seen enough sources to back that up, even if that idea has evolved. Lior said that the Diaspora Affairs Ministry and its minister, Naftali Bennett, anyone, he might be a little, I don't know if he knew what was going to happen to him when this article came out, could do what they wanted, but we have to know what the Torah's opinion is. And this is interesting because while they are obviously dealing in the political sphere here, essentially they're saying, stop bringing politics into the realm of conversion, because that's exactly where missionizing comes from. Now, if you ask a missionary, they'll say, no, I'm trying to save people's souls. And I do believe that most of them sincerely believe that. But ultimately, the religions that have focused on missionizing and have a long history of it, and again, I'm not talking about those individual young people that sincerely want to bring God to the heathens, et cetera, like that. But overall, the history of missionizing is really born out of a political and power need of a country. And at one point in history, Judaism sort of had that under Hyrcanus, but then we thought maybe we can get it back under the Romans. We don't know that that happened for sure, but it's likely it probably did. But then when it became clear that Judaism would not exist as a political power for who knows how long, Judaism became something very different.